Welcome to the Just Settled podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an incredible guest, Negin Nazi, a Beverly Hills personal injury attorney, an incredible Beverly Hills personal injury attorney. Welcome to Just Settled, Negin, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dan, for the kind words. I'm really excited about this podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, so we can kind of dive right in. My first question for you is just curious if you can sort of describe a personal injury case that has filled you with pride as an attorney.
Yeah, definitely. So I had this one case where I was representing this super hardworking girl in a ride share incident. On the day of the incident, it was like around 5 a.m. This girl requests a ride to pick her up from her house and take her to one of her jobs where she was like earning like minimum wage. So the rideshare driver arrives and she gets in the back seat. Before she is buckled in, the driver starts driving. As he is like compromising a turn, a hit and run driver crashes into the left side of his vehicle. And this poor girl gets tossed around inside the interior of the vehicle like a pinball. And she has like all this bruising on her face to show it.
That's terrible.
Yeah,
that is so how did that kind of play out? Obviously she came to you with this case, right? And then sort of what were the next steps from there?
Yeah, she was just concerned about her medical bills getting paid. She had taken some time off from work to go to these doctor appointments, and she was concerned about her loss of income, which were both quite inconsequential. I mean, she was working two jobs, part-time at both. One of them was like a sandwich shop and another was like at a taco shop.
Okay, gotcha. In terms of what she was expecting for restitution or payout, what kind of restitution was she expecting with this case, or were you expecting? And in terms of like the value of that case, what is a reasonable expectation, I guess?
In the beginning of the case, we really didn't fully grasp her injuries because they were manifesting with time. She had what we call a silent injury or an invisible injury. She had a TBI. So it wasn't like her arm was broken, her leg was broken. She was just kind of having issues with like headaches, becoming like irritable, and people like her loved ones were telling her that she's becoming short tempered, and then she started like misplacing things. So in the beginning, we really were just like, listen to your doctors, do your treatment, and let's see what is up with you.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. That makes sense. And as the case kind of progressed, what opposition or obstacles did you encounter? And were there any unique challenges about this case?
Oh yeah, like, where do I begin? This case was like a ticking time bomb. So first, the defense was arguing that the girl was at fault because she did not have her seatbelt. So what they were trying to do was shift the responsibility on her by using the no seatbelt defense. And it's interesting because that defense does not actually apply in California because passengers are exempt from wearing seatbelts when they're in vehicles like for hire, like taxis and ride shares. So that was the first hurdle. And I essentially went through deposition testimony of both the girl, which is the plaintiff, and the rideshare driver. And the girl was, and we established that she wasn't afforded a reasonable opportunity to buckle up because as soon as she got in the rideshare, she was just putting her cup in the cup holder. And while she was maneuvering the seatbelt to put it on, the driver had already started driving, and the incident didn't happen too far from where she was picked up. Okay. That hurdle was essentially a breeze. After we established that she was not comparatively at fault, defense had attacked the causation of injuries, which essentially means that the impact could not have caused her to suffer the traumatic brain injuries. So what the defense did was subpoena her medical records because, they have a right to investigate her medical injuries, especially relating to certain body parts that she is claiming was injured.
Right.
And I had to like fight that out with the defense because they were trying to get any and all records. And finally we got them to limit them to only obtaining 10 years before the date of the incident. Before I go into like deep details to what happened next, I should tell you about her injuries because they'll all make sense.
Okay.
So after the incident, she was complaining about hearing in one of her ear, like she was having issues with that. She was like having like headaches, like some dizziness and nausea. And these are all indicators of traumatic brain injury. And interestingly, like the general public thinks that a traumatic brain injury is only suffered when they have, cracked skull, or maybe the brain is spilling out of the skull. They're like, oh, that's a TBI. But that's not usually the case. Like anyone can suffer a TBI. It could be like minor, moderate, severe. And you can usually sustain that type of injury when there's a sudden movement, like a whiplash, where the brain hits the inside casing of the skull.
Right.
And interestingly, I actually wrote an article about this that got published in the Daily Journal. But going back to this case, so the strong point of her case was like having hearing issues in one ear. At this point, when this issue is becoming predominant, she had racked up like $30,000 in medical bills.
Okay.
And so the defense gets these medical records and they're thinking like, they have this big grin on their face, like they have this smoking gun, like this case is going to be closed, because what they find out in the record is that before this incident, like years before the incident, she goes to Kaiser, she tells her doctor, you know what, I'm having a hearing ache, but my mom told me when I was a little girl that I had issues with hearing as a child. So this is in her medical record. And defense is super excited because they're like, oh, this is a pre-existing issue. Like the incident didn't cause this. Like she already had this issue. And then the next battle was, okay, we got to start deposing the doctors, like all of the doctors that treated her with her hearing issue at Kaiser. And that was really like the turning point. So when we deposed one of her main doctors, he had like testified that the hearing loss was caused by damage to the auditory nerve as opposed to the ear itself.
Right.
And long story short, we were battling this issue and there was one test left, and that test, the hearing test, was going to identify or help us understand whether this was a pre-existing issue or it was caused by more recent trauma. And the test result could have either like made or break her case. And at this point, her past medical bills had gone from like $30,000 to $37,000.
Okay. All right. Okay. That is, yeah, a lot of hurdles and a lot of the pre-existing thing is, I could imagine they were probably all over that. So when that happened, I mean, in terms of like the timeline, did that alter the timeline of the case? And like what kind of, from beginning to finish with this specific case, how long was sort of did the whole thing run in terms of its course? And again, did any of these obstacles sort of alter that?
Sure. So the incident happened in like 2018.
Okay.
And her trial was set in 2021. So the accident happened like April 2018, and the courts didn't set trial until like December 2021. But the unique aspect of this was, it wasn't really about her treatment or the evidence that was like developing as time progressed. It was during COVID. And as you might know, a lot of the courts were kind of shut down as COVID was developing in 2020. So with this case, the delays were really caused because of the courts, because they weren't setting trials, in 2020, and things were just getting like pushed further while everyone was trying to figure out how to deal with, the stay home orders that were implemented by the state of California.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't even think about, obviously the COVID stuff, would have been, I'm sure, delayed everything. So I guess, like, at what point in this case did you realize a settlement was likely? Or did this go to court, or did you know that you were going to be able to keep it out of court? How did sort of navigating that work? And yeah, just kind of curious about the details there.
Yeah, so it was like one day we'd be like, we're taking this case to trial. The next would be like, we have to settle this because, as I said, like her injuries were manifesting with time and more information were coming to light. But at the point when I decided it may be best to settle was right before she had to go in for that auditory testing. And right after she was offered $1.1 million when
Wow.
she only had $37,000 in medical bills.
Right.
And so it was kind of like, that's why I said it was like a ticking time bomb.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So when you say those numbers, 1.1 million, obviously that is, a staggering amount of money, but obviously this is a traumatic brain injury. It's a serious, life altering injury for this person. How did the negotiation process sort of unfold? Did the insurance company, as the defendant, attempt to minimize the compensation? I would imagine they probably would. And how did you advocate for your client's interests?
Yeah, so, insurance companies and defense counsel, they're always going to fight against what the plaintiffs are alleging.
Mhm.
And most personal injury claims settle before litigation, before filing a lawsuit. And those claims are usually like home run claims, meaning there's no question of fault and there's no question as to whether the incident actually caused the injuries.
Okay.
Only usually the tough claims come into litigation where, I have to file a lawsuit with the court and get the courts involved. So at that point, the insurance companies will hire a defense firm to fight it out. And so the defense firm, they have to make it, shown that they're worth getting paid by these insurance companies. So what they're going to do is like minimize the insurance company's exposure by either shifting the responsibility to someone else or
Okay.
something else, or try to poke holes in the plaintiff's injuries or your case. And the way I advocate for my clients personally is by not allowing myself to get greedy. And, there's a famous quote about greed where, greed knows no satisfaction, only insatiable hunger.
Mhm.
So the way that the personal injury works is that I don't get paid unless my client gets paid. I'm not paid on an hourly fee agreement. I get paid based on a contingency.
Mhm.
So when my client gets money, I get money.
Right.
So before the test, this auditory test, we got $1.1 million on the table offered from defense. And then there was the auditory test looming ahead, and the case could have gone two separate ways after the test. Either there was going to be some kind of evidence proving that this was a pre-existing issue. She already was experiencing hearing loss, or it could have been like, no, her hearing loss was traumatic and it happened like recently. Right. So it was really tricky because maybe she could have gone more if the results turned out one way, or the defense would have been like, no, we were right pre-existing. We're taking that 1.1 million off the table. You might get 100,000 because her meds were like $37,000. So I think the way that I advocated for my client in this situation and in all of the situations that I have with these cases is being completely honest with her. I think if I was greedy, I would have been more willing to gamble on her case and wait for the results. But I gave her the pros and the cons of the settlement offer and was objective as possible as I could be. While I was doing this, I took out any personal interest and any biases I had in whatever outcome would have been of her situation.
Okay, that's great. So speaking of outcome and, final settlement, what was the final outcome of the settlement and how did it, positively impact the client and their recovery process.
Sure. So she did settle the case at that 1.1 million before the results were going to come out of that test. And at that time, she was working 2 jobs, earning minimum wage. She was living with her partner. They had a baby during during COVID. She was completely disoriented. She was trying to figure out the issues that she was, especially with the hearing loss in one ear. And so during that time, she got connected to one of the best doctors, and she walked off with more than $500,000 in her pocket.
That's great.
So yeah, it totally changed her life.
That's amazing. That is absolutely incredible. So, well, thank you so much, Negin, for sharing this case with us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for joining us. And that's pretty much it,
Thank you so much, Dan. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate taking the time to sit with me today.
Awesome. Thank you, Negin.